Welcome back to the Good Growth podcast, brought to you by BGF, the UK and Ireland's most active equity investor. In this episode, we're joined by Maya Moufarek, a seasoned growth expert who's seen both sides of the BGF journey. First as the founding CMO of Pharmacy2U, and now as part of BGF's talent network. With over 15 years of experience in tech and marketing, holding key roles at Google and American Express, Maya is now a fractional CMO, angel investor, and board member. In this conversation, Maya shares lessons she's learned from advising high-growth CEOs, why good growth is about balancing profitability with long-term vision, and the marketing trends she's expecting to see in the next 5 years. Let's dive in.
Maya, welcome to the BGF Good Growth podcast. You have one of the most varied careers that I think I've ever seen. You've worked at big multinational corporates like American Express and Google, but you've also worked at fast-growing startups like Pharmacy2U, and now you're a founder in your own right as well. Which one of those have you enjoyed the most?
Thanks for having me. Always great to be back at BGS. I think they were just building blocks as part of a career. I don't think there was an intention to go from one to the other. I would like to think that actually in all of those, I was always part of kind of the smaller part of these larger businesses. Some people will call those like entrepreneurs almost when you're starting something new. So at American Express, it was the nascent days of their offers marketplace that connected merchants and card members. Some people would think of Amex as a marketplace, but not in the digital term. And so it was really something new being built and brought to many markets fast, obviously, because they had the funds to do that. I think for me, it's always about, what impact can you have and how quickly can you change something? I think if I had to be in some kind of very infrastructure heavy and long decision making processes, places, I would run away very fast. But then it can be part of, as long as there's willingness to develop something new and make change, then it can happen very well in larger enterprises or smaller. And some smaller are very slow too, and that doesn't work either for me at least. But that was the mix. I think the thread throughout was always about building sustainable growth, technology enabled at least, if not completely technology innovation. And so it's been a really interesting path that leads me to now being an advisor and a growth partner to other founders and investors, I guess.
And your role at Pharmacy2U was the CMO. Mm-hmm. How has marketing changed over the last 10 years?
Yeah. And interestingly, even that title of CMO is almost misleading because technically, in the traditional term of a CMO, they maybe own the brand, drive the traffic, maybe the acquisition, and it kind of stops there. My role at Pharmacy2U was very much a chief customer officer, owning, all the way to the marketing contribution of the P&L, and the front-end product teams were with me. So the customer experience after acquisition, all the way to retention and kind of repeat purchase would be very much with my team. And I think that's actually the only way to sustainably grow digital-led businesses.
Yes.
If you don't have a sales team and basically your CMO is your sales team, your digital infrastructure is the sales engine, it's really important to be able to optimize throughout that holistically. And it doesn't mean that they can't be a separate product team or it's not a collaboration. And I talk a lot about how growth is a team sport. And so kind of saying, we're firing the CMO because sales are not up is very short-sighted, to be honest. It tends to mean that there's a much deeper challenge in the growth infrastructure of the business. And so I think in that sense, actually, with my business partners at Pharmacy2U, we've very much had built that, it's growth, it's one single entity, everyone's involved. And obviously, operations need to follow, right?
Yes.
If we do way too well, then we can't deliver and there's an operational challenge and that's terrible for growth too, right? So that's in the way I think that was the beginning of that really consideration of growth as a holistic engine within the business.
Yeah.
And the customer teams, I guess, beyond just marketing, really being able to influence throughout. And sometimes it's more fuel,
Yes.
is it more media money, and sometimes it's just optimizing that funnel to make sure it's not the leaky bucket.
But thinking that as the full customer journey is really interesting, and that shows how it's kind of evolved as well over the years, right? It's not just about bringing them into the business and then handing them over and so on. What do you think has kind of led to that change in terms of thinking of it as more of a kind of customer journey over the whole way?
I mean, there's like pre-high interest rate and post-high interest rate also, I think, growth themes here, where for the longest of time, and I think, Uber is like the reference of, venture capital sponsoring our Uber trips for years, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if cash is very much available, then you're kind of subsidizing your growth constantly and you're never really profitable, and you're hoping you'll become one day. And then on the other side, I think, as soon as kind of investment dried out a little bit, it was harder to land. You have to drive sustainable growth. And so I think that's really what it comes from, because often it's less media money available and you have to do more with less. And therefore you have to make sure that your engine is really top notch. And so anything you put in really produces the right results in the right time frame. It might, whatever the right unit economics or payback periods might be for your business. I mean, at Pharmacy2U, we were absolutely about fast growth, and it's a low margin business, but the model was very much at scale. It will be profitable. And initially we knew exactly, we weren't going after everyone. We decided who the bullseye customer was, which was a 40 plus type of audience. And proven later, a lot of our competitors were going much younger, and that wasn't profitable, for example.
How did you decide on that kind of customer segmentation?
I mean, for those who don't know, Pharmacy2U, third largest pharmacy in this country now. Online repeat prescription is basically that we were the category creator really of that. So who are on repeat prescriptions and who is going to be on repeat prescription in the long term, right? Mm-hmm. But also because we were an online kind of home delivery business, paid by the NHS, and the NHS very much, provides that service through pharmacy partners, would it be online partners or offline small pharmacies, local pharmacies. They were not paying us for the delivery part of it, right? So we had to make it work profitably. So obviously, the more products you'd have in the basket, the less we're subsidizing delivery, right, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was really the consideration. And then luckily for us, the NHS is very transparent with the data of, what type of profiles are what kind of meds. And so as you analyze that data, you realize that, maybe a 20 or 30-year-old will be on, contraceptive for a very long time, but it's one line, yes. Right? And so while it's a long-term customer, actually on every single delivery, there's only so much you can make as margin, versus, you then analyze more and you realize that in this country, from about 40 years old, if you're on repeat prescriptions, you're most probably on them for the rest of your life. And actually it only compounds, unfortunately. And so that's something else you look at and you'd be like, okay, well, first of all, the pain for that customer to actually be able to do those repeats and to stay on top of adhering to their prescription is really high. So we have a kind of stickiness of our products is really high because they really need it and we really make a difference in their ability to care for themselves. And also, the more products are in the basket, the more margin opportunity we have, and it's still one single delivery.
And how did the customer acquisition costs change when you realised that you were going after the sort of over 40s, and how did the marketing strategy sort of change with that?
I don't think it actually ever changed. We really started there because the way Pharmacy2U, the group Pharmacy2U went to be, it was very much with BGF's help funding a merger between an atomical business me and my partners were turning around, and then Pharmacy2U, the original business who was tiny, somewhat in stealth mode, had worked with the NHS to create some of the technology connection necessary to enable that. when we brought those two businesses together, I think both the process of merger, of building the case, of figuring out why would we do that and how would that work, really took us down the line of really considering what is the opportunity, who would we go after, what would the unit economics look like, what might our strategy be, and so we really always went after that older audience. Now, not to say that there was never spillover. Of course, there's always spillover, and actually, as a NHS pharmacy, it is your obligation to serve anyone who requests to be served by you, and we absolutely fulfill that need. But we proactively only went for those 40 plus. So it hasn't changed. I think the unit economics and the CPA, the cost of acquisition, changed as we experimented initially to try to figure out what was the right playbook, because there was no playbook for that industry, at least, and so we had to create our own. And most businesses will have to create their own, but they can learn from other places. Usually we really were starting from scratch, but we had access to a lot of the data thanks to the NHS. So what really changed is that early experimentation. Can we afford being on TV? Do we need to be on TV? What is the demand generation and the awareness building and trust building? It's really important in this industry, channels versus the kind of conversion channels. And so that's really when we learned what was possible. And then also as we saw how sticky, right, as you got some history and you see how sticky those different cohorts are and which one works better, you can also optimize where you're ready to pay more and where you're not ready to do that. So that's really what we learned throughout that process.
And what should founders be thinking about? Because often when they take investment, it's one of the big areas that they'll kind of go on to spend on is marketing and trying to improve that. What should they be thinking about? And you've talked about loads of different kind of combinations there almost of it. What should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I came to coin this phrase of channels come last, because every time someone gets investment, they're like, okay, off I go, I'm gonna be advertising more, and I'm like, no, please don't, right? Because first of all, you need to be able to sustain doing that and doing that profitably. And I always remind everyone that at each of those inflection points, we technically raising capital is for a business. Yeah. We need to go back to some of the foundations. Do you truly know your audience? Do you truly know what they need you most? Do you truly understand the difference or the solution that it's providing someone beyond the features and all of that? And it's really going back to some of those foundations. And we touched on operations, for example, within your business. What would that look like? And really going back to some of those foundations first.
Yeah.
And really then making sure that your engine is optimized to take more fuel. And I think that is really the challenge. They suddenly, it's not because we have the cash that we have to buy more fuel, is really my kind of core message to founders when, cash lands in the bank. Yeah. For a bunch of them, they will have already done a lot of prep and maybe they just need to do kind of final tweaks and changes. I think also, the more complex that growth engine becomes, so the more different fuel sources you put in, different channels, different audiences, maybe you're developing additional verticals within your business, the more complex also that infrastructure will need to become. Would it be for attribution, for really understanding what's working, what's not? Are you tracking them in the right place? Are your experiments set up in such a way that really drive interest? But also do you have enough customer insights to know what to do next?
Yeah. And how do you talk to founders about going back and changing those foundations? Because the entrepreneurial journey, is filled with so many pitfalls along the way. To have got to the stage where you're taking investment is partly an achievement in itself, although not solely just taking investment is an achievement, right? But how do you sort of persuade founders to sort of go back to those foundational principles and be like, maybe we need to change these now?
I mean, I'm just working with a business right now, and, I think they're turning around maybe, a run rate of 16 million. Yeah. That GA implementation is just shambles. Yeah. I mean, part of me is like, oh my God, well done for getting that far. It's unbelievable to have accomplished so much. But as a marketer, there is no way I'm going to be doing anything until I have clean data.
Yeah.
Right? And so often it's in those conversations, and obviously if you don't know, you don't know, right? Like, so I think those, especially, would be with BGF that has a great talent team and others, they will get guidance, right? They'll be like, hey, we've seen those things, you might want to have another look. So I think at least being open to listening to the fact and realizing that actually it's maybe better to start slightly slower, getting some of those right, because what would happen to that business if right now they and they have the cash, they double their acquisition, we would not know what worked, what didn't work. We would have no idea actually of what came through properly. We'll see how much it costed us and how much sales we have, and nothing in between really, or not reliably at least. And so that, some of those things, and it happens more often than I knew, I guess. So that's really that. There's like, if I am to put more fuel in my engine, well, I know exactly what happened, what worked, what didn't, and why.
Yeah. And what are some of the sort of the framings and the workshops that you use to help founders think through the channels, even if it is channels last? Just because in the modern world, there's so many marketing opportunities.
Yes.
How do you make them think about it?
A lot of your customer insight will actually guide to where your customer are when they feel the pain. And I think that's what people forget. They're like, oh, Google, Meta, etc. Everyone's on there. Maybe.
Yeah.
But at which point and framing the problem in what way would resonate with them? So at Pharmacy2U, we had this wonderful example where, and things have moved on. This is like a few years ago now. But when people didn't know about online repeat prescriptions, because really no one was properly offering them, what it meant is you had to, call your GP, waiting for them to give you an appointment, show up at your GP, sit in the, in the waiting room until you're seen, to spend exactly 30 seconds in that room to get a repeat. At best, maybe you could come and the receptionist will take care of it, but you still had to come, fill in some form, come back, etc. And so really the pain was them sitting in that waiting room or being in the GP, a practice overall, and being like, oh my God, why am I here? There must be a better way, or there should be a better way. It was really what was going through their heads. And so GPs are very much businesses like everyone else. They offer opportunities to advertise with it, within reason, obviously, and reliable and good services, all that. So we started, putting leaflets in there and saying, let us take care of this. Just sign up here, right? That is typically something I would have never discovered if I hadn't gone really deep into understanding the journey, understanding the pain points, understanding some of that. We then came to discover actually some of the people that suffered the most from their ability to fulfill their medication themselves were also people that had some element of mental health challenges or some kind of shame towards their condition. And so showing up in public, picking up massive bags of meds and things like that was really difficult for them. So we started really engaging with those communities, discovering that a lot of them engage with charities that are, kind of central hubs for their condition, right? The Heart Foundation and this and that. And so we would engage with them. As you get to know your audience or your existing customers, you will get a lot of guidance, both of what resonates with them, how they frame the problem, what kind of solutions they're after, and also where to find them, where they feel the pain the most, so that you can engage with them at that point. So I think that is really the first one, is kind of how do you use that customer insight? Because a lot of businesses think of customer insight as validating their solution or their product.
Yes.
And it's part of it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But it's not really that, because that's great to make sure you develop the right solution for them. But you still don't know how they got to your product.
Yeah.
And so that's really what they need to fully understand, and that will guide both messaging and what channels to engage with. Thank you. So that's kind of the first foundation.
But it's also very interesting that you talk about sort of old school sort of leaflets, right?
Yeah.
Going in. It's such a kind of default to kind of think we've got to spend money on Meta, Instagram, etc. Whereas actually, some of the old school methods still work.
Yeah, and so that's kind of foundational for the audience. The other aspect for businesses is really to think deep about their business model and the industry they're in. Again, another client of mine at the moment, I'm having those interesting conversations with their board, where some of the people on the board are on just kind of, from platform businesses, I guess, right? They didn't have a physical product. That company has a physical product. And some of the things I'm hearing at board level, I'm like, that's great, but that applies to a platform.
Yeah.
Not to a health tech business where there's so much emotion and angst and challenges associated with that. Like, I might like Instagram, not exactly, I have no emotional connection to the platform.
Yeah.
But I have an emotional connection to anyone who's providing medical care towards me. And I better trust them, and I better feel, like their bedside manners and all of that. Otherwise, I'm out of here. Right? And so often founders and boards will share very, well-intentioned advice. And obviously hear it, and there might be something you can learn from it, but come back always to saying what industry I'm in.
Yeah.
Is there an emotional connection in this industry? Is trust essential? What kind of trust is important? How am I going to build that trust? And really understanding that to then again guiding some of it. So at Pharmacy2U, we had to be on TV. So no one ever heard of online review prescriptions. Yeah. It wasn't a thing. And guess what? You don't get your meds from anywhere. It's not like, the socks from Amazon didn't arrive, big deal.
Yeah.
No, it needs to be reliable. TV, and because of the way TV is regulated, brings a certain credibility to businesses who advertise there. So it was part of our strategy because we needed to build that trust. We needed to build that.
Yeah.
And actually, also the other problem that many innovative businesses will have, there is no Google traffic for online repeat prescriptions back then.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing, so no one's looking for it. Right? And a lot of innovative businesses will have that problem. They've developed a solution to something most people think cannot be resolved. There is no better way than what they're doing today.
And where does marketing play a role, or how does marketing play a role in something that seems so obvious, like online repeat prescriptions? So, like, in a way you would think that's such a good product, that's so easy for people to kind of get on board with for all the reasons that you outlined. But actually the product doesn't just sell itself in that instance, right? That's where marketing also has an important role.
So I think we've just touched a lot on like trust building and awareness building, because if no one's looking for it, then it might resolve a very important problem, which this clearly did. So the role of marketing here is very much around building that trust, explaining how it works, explaining why it's better than their current proposition, and driving that awareness first. And then as that happens, and so that's what we use TV for, and many other places, which were what I call demand generation, really. It's like, hey, there's a better way. Yeah. Right? Once you've done that, then you're using a lot of your digital channels, right? And the dual screen kind of aspect. Oh, who are they? Let me look them up, right? And then you're reverting back to more of those like traditional funnels, now that I've built trust and I go, I sparked interest in something like that. Now we're applying much more traditional process of like, how does it work? Where do I go? Is it safe? Is the experience intuitive enough that seems easy enough I'm going to get through? Things like that. Yeah.
And at your peak of growth at Pharmacy2U, you were opening a new one every 2.5 days. What was that?
And the equivalent of an offline pharmacy every 2.5 days, yes.
Exactly. How was that? Like, for what? Talk us, explain that metric, but also how did you manage that growth?
I mean, basically in the UK, the vast majority of pharmacies are small independent pharmacies, right? You have the Boots and the Lloyds, fine, a couple of chains, but still over 50% of the market, I believe even today, is served by those small businesses. Really the bet at Pharmacy2U is to say, you know what, when it comes to counting pills and distribution at scale, centralized is better, and robots and automation are better at counter pills than humans. Yeah. And there is no massive expertise value add in counting pills. So that was really the premise of the business. And in the process, we can save the NHS a lot of money, because if we can dispense better and more efficiently, then it saves the NHS money. And we had proven that we costed the NHS about 15% less than distribution through small businesses. And the way that growth really happened was initially that trust building, as I mentioned. But then over time, it became a recommendation flywheel. Right? If if I think that I found something really new and interesting that really made a difference in my life, next time I'm having a health conversation or a friend of mine is like, caring for their parents and struggling with getting their repeats sorted, I'm going to advise. And so that is also quite a foundational element for any growth is what kind of flywheels can you build? And what you're doing, what will happen? Another core metrics from the health industry was very much that, and it's true in other industries to be fair, but like that really the kind of the lady in the family would lead the kind of health management for most of the family, whether it be kids or a spouse. And so with that approach, then you're like not only whoever is the first entry, and you're then able to add more. And that often will be or a spouse. We did, our child base was small in that sense. We were definitely more an adult business, but you would, that would be their own parents, the in-laws, or the spouse that will come in. And then all the references, that they would provide for us across the board. So those are some of the aspects, I guess, that really contributed to that. And then, in the core of those businesses, if you're providing a good service, there's no real differentiator, right? It's the same meds from the NHS delivered to your doorstep. It's a very sticky proposition. And really what we then needed to make sure is anyone that we onboarded, that we served exceptionally well. And so there was a constant balance between how fast can we grow versus how fast can we serve. And so there was a lot of investment in, automating warehouses, building the next big warehouse and things like that.
Did you ever feel it got too far towards the growth rather than the servicing side?
No, I do think that we managed to have a really good balance, and I had amazing operational partners at Pharmacy2U that did a tremendous job, and we had in the customer service team as well as the operations team, and we very much embraced kind of holistic growth approach. So on a quarterly basis, we would do our monthly and quarterly, but the deep dives were really quarterly, planning what is our expected growth trajectory, what does that mean for customer service and operations, how do we balance this out? There was constant check-ins, and so I would sometimes, be requested at least to be very clear if we're putting, going faster suddenly, or making sure that we were very much in sync, and that's quite essential, right?
Yes.
Because, if first of all, it's no joke to mess up people's prescriptions. Again, it's not, I didn't get my socks. So we had an obligation of care, and so the quality of our service was essential. I think the most painful times I remember were mostly like, Royal Mail strikes and things that you couldn't really control. And so, but how therefore we would go above and beyond for our customers, to really tell them, you know what, there's a Royal Mail strike coming up. Let me sort out your prescription a bit early this time. I'll explain to your GP why it's coming early to make sure you definitely get it on time, and how we go above and beyond to make sure that is as smooth as possible to them, because at the end of the day, it's our service, no matter what partners we use for delivery of the things.
And that definitely shows where that marketing and customer bit that you were talking about at the beginning sort of shows up. But was there a time, or what's your advice to founders when things aren't growing quickly enough, right? Because every founder will be going through that experience at some point of, not enough is happening here, etc. What's your advice then? Is it to go back to some of those foundational principles?
Yeah, I think those foundational principles never go away, to be honest.
Yeah.
They are very true pre-product market fit, where you're trying to figure out, do you have the right solution to the right problem and all of that. But it continues because things evolve, the market evolves, your customer base evolves, you might be introducing new products. So I think those always continue. I think when you diagnose kind of the lack of growth, growth in that sense means so many things, right? I think there's a realization, most recently we talked about that engine, and it's kind of, retention and customer relationship marketing and all of that, and really staying close to it. It's just, is it sticky? Mm-hmm. Is the problem that people are not staying? Is the problem that people are not coming? I think it's really that diagnostics becomes really important, because very often it's like, it's not growing as fast as it needs. It's often not it is an acquisition problem, but it's who you're acquiring and are they staying, or who are you acquiring and are you able to retain them? Is the product what they need, and then the way it needs to approach? So I think it's really we think like the challenge I have often is that people, when they say it's not growing fast enough, they think they need more marketing.
Yes.
Where very often, really, you tend to be able to crack your channels. They may be too expensive for you and it doesn't work in your unit economics, and I get that. But really, when growth is not going, it usually that there is a mix between a targeting problem, who you're going after, and what solution you're offering.
Yeah.
And that is really what you need to unlock first, because once this is working really smoothly, and therefore you have happy customers with a very sticky product and they're staying, your referral flywheel starts, and also you're more apt at acquiring exactly the right audience for your product.
It's really interesting to think of it like that. And you've referenced BGF a few times in it. You've sort of been both sides of the BGF. Talk about what it was like, sort of taking the investment and how that worked, and give us just an idea of when that was, etc.
Yeah. So Atomico had a portfolio company that was e-commerce health business, which me and my business partner were tasked to turn around, and we turned it around and made it self-sustain. But it was never going to be this, massive fund returner and business. But we were all consumer people. And we kind of looked at this health industry that was 2010, 15, and where we were like, okay, it hasn't really been as disrupted by tech as many other industries, what the opportunity is. And that's where we really identified that repeat prescriptions were still an offline tool. You could get most things done online, but not online repeat prescriptions. And the NHS had worked for many years at connecting every single GP with every single pharmacy, which is the connection they own and no one can build. And then the rest, obviously, you can build yourself. And so that's it's on the premise of that, and the historical Pharmacy2U having been part of being a partner to the NHS to build the technology, then spent many years just waiting for that technology to be adopted. And so by 2014, 90% of the GPs were connected to all the pharmacies, and so it was really time for a national play. And so that's where we engaged with Pharmacy2U and offered a merger, for which we went to BGF to fund it, and they generously did. And then I remember vividly, we had 18 months to prove that merger and that business model and the unit economics. And so I remember us spending a lot of time building like crazy the app, the front-end experience, because everything at that point was really done by mail as a form of thing in those little pockets of regions where that adoption was happening. Building that as fast as we could, and starting, testing channels and acquisition, what it looked, and deciding definitely on our bullseye customer. And, in that process, because we were so focused on that, we had to, take some hard decisions. And one of them that I'll live with for the rest of my life, but I wish I changed the name of the business. It was so 1999 kind of thing. But I just didn't have, I didn't have the luxury of messing around with SEO and changing names and URLs. Like, it was so much that needed to happen, because it was that, and then we had to raise. So I remember those conversations to this day. Mark and Gary, who are my business partners there, we still were like, we wish we were a bit braver there.
But it does say what it does on the tin, right? Because it is always one of my favourite questions to ask founders, founding teams, is like, where did the name come from? Well, I can see where you guys are pretty.
It was the historical name of that business, and we kept it. But I think.
And tell us about your sort of new venture and where the name of that comes from. Whilst we're on. So what did you learn?
Really, from my current business, I, for years, have signed my emails M², because I'm Maya Moufarek. And that really came from early kind of math lessons, and I discovered this cube thing, and power of two thing, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And so that kind of, became a fun little signature for me. And so when I started venturing into doing my own thing, my friends were just laughing, and they were like, so are you going to be like M cubed now or something like that? And so then kind of this marketing cube as opposed to cubed came along, because really it's, you kind of, we covered a lot of that today. It's like, how can you just make sure that it all works well, and the cube kind of turns in the right way? And so, so that's kind of how it all came about.
And you're now part of the BGF Talent Network. So talk us through how that works. So
Love engagement with BGF. It's very much like when they need an extra pair of eyes of expertise around growth and digital, that they tend to call me to support the portfolio, have an initial conversation, sometimes just as part of their DD or post DD terms to help businesses make sure that they get started on the right way. So I've done a couple of those projects with them.
And what's your kind of advice to founders that are thinking of taking investment when it comes to marketing?
I mean, I'll start with taking investment in general, marketing as well. So I'm sure some of that advice is very well known, but I think you kind of have to remember that it's a very long-term relationship. And so it's not only what firm you're taking the money from, but who is going to be that partner of yours and can you work together? I think that, choosing a co-founder and choosing an investor is maybe at the same level of how drastically impactful it is on a business in good and bad ways. Really being very clear on how much you're raising and for what, I think is really important. I almost think that raising for marketing is the easiest thing, but maybe it's just because of my my kind of view of the world. But it's, if you know how much it costs you to acquire, if you know how it's profitable, by when it becomes profitable, and that's kind of it's all sustainable, then you're like, well, you give me this, I can produce that, and that's what happened. And here's my buffer because something will go wrong at some point somewhere. So I think that's kind of easier. I think what's harder is when you're raising money to further expand product or to build, a parallel track or an additional vertical. This really is much harder to fully predict because you really, to some extent, you're going back to seed investment to some extent, no matter how big the business is, because the infrastructure is still there. And obviously the entity in the business has more wisdom than the tiny thing that is just getting started. But that, I think those are the aspects of it. But raising money for marketing is, for me, it's very much like, have you managed to try a little bit with whatever cash you had to that point, and therefore do you have a lot of clarity as to how you're going to use that cash and how much of it do you really need? I think, again, when cash was, interest rates were low and cash was heavily available, I guess, through venture, people were like, oh, paying, Google, Meta, let's go, it's fine, etc. I think people are much more sustainable with their cash now, very much thinking of community, those referral flywheel. How do you make sure that you start those small fires that kind of catch each other as they grow, so that you can be a bit more sustained and not be overly reliant on paid channels. There's nothing wrong with paid channels. They're a great amplifier, but if that's the only thing that you have going for you, it's much harder to sustain because you wanted to amplify something that is slightly more organic.
And what do you see are the trends in marketing for the next sort of 4 to 5 years? Obviously, there's been the sort of cheap money era that you talked about as well, and COVID partly that as well. But what do you see sort of looking ahead for the rest of the 2020s, I suppose?
I mean, one aspect that is obviously on everyone's kind of mind is around AI. The reality of it is, SEO in the way we know it today, which tends to be the organic channel that those have done well so far, are in a good way very reliant on, is something that's going to completely transform. I think, I don't know that, any of those numbers have been made fully transparently public yet, but I think we all can see in our own way of searching, we no longer start with Google, right? Yeah. And so there is this massive transformation of what does organic really mean, and building your own communities. I think founder-led personal brand also really important, and kind of LinkedIn took some of that power, but would it be through newsletters or other ways of being that voice of the business, and this representation of the business is another organic way, I guess, that you can drive some of that. So I think that is a massive shift right now. I don't think anyone has a playbook for how you optimize kind of, SEO optimize for the AI engines, but I think that's one thing that to really consider and to actually be as worried as being very SEO dependent today, then you should be if you're completely Google or Meta dependent today. And I think really preparing for that switch and building your own community outside of some of that. The other aspect, I think, is...
What advice do you give on building community? Because that's very interesting. Like,
I mean, it obviously depends on kind of what size of business you're in, etc. But what it really means is that...
But it is this private channel marketing almost. Right?
It is. So there's a couple of reasons to have a community. No matter how big or small you are, having some kind of group, a private Facebook group, a WhatsApp group, or whatever you want, of some kind of really dedicated customers that kind of love you, but also will tell you all your truths kind of version of them, so that you have access to them, so they are a bit the pulse of your community, so that you can test some things with them, check some things with them, have them as also an amplifier for you overall. I think is the minimum every single business should have.
Yeah.
Because if it's almost how, it's kind of your own customer stakeholders that you have constant access to. I think it's really important. You can grow that even further. And it's as simple as, no matter how small or big you are, of saying, hey, if you're really passionate about this topic, here's a group you can join, right? Yeah. And it can be as basic as a WhatsApp group that obviously you have to curate and apply some community rules to, but still that's very much kind of at the center of it. And that's really where that kind of flywheel, not only then customers can help each other, how did you do that, what happened here, etc. And everyone thinks of that it's only for SaaS businesses, but it's not, right? Yeah. It's like, hey, what do I do if I'm traveling on a holiday? Do I order earlier? Yeah. They can help each other. Oh yeah, I've done this. This is how it works, etc. Taking a Pharmacy2U example again here, but so that's really what it is for. Is that they help each other, they support each other, and obviously it amplifies any flywheel, and you have access for insights. I think that becomes really important. Then again, it depends on your business. If you're in a business where the more people use your product, the better the product becomes, like that's also another aspect of the flywheel and feedback. But this is really what it means, is that you have direct access to your audience, and no platform is that piece. And so that, we talked about that possible leaky bucket that you need to fix your engine before you put more fuel into it. Well, it also starts with really in-depth customer lifecycle marketing, onboarding, nurturing, welcome flows, reactivation flows, and that ability to doing that, and the ability to not only do that in a one-way communication over email or SMS or others, but also allowing that, your customers talking to each other, which is really the term community, right? Yeah, if for those who it might not be clear, it's them talking to each other. It's not just you talking to them.
And what's the most exciting thing about AI's impact on marketing over the next 5 years?
So coming back to that, with AI agents, there'll be such an opportunity to automate and go so much faster on so many things. But even today on a very basic use, right? Like doing keyword research would take days, can take literally minutes now, right? Because you just the right prompt, right question, give me a bunch, what does it look like, etc. It's really the speed at which some of those things can happen means that you can experiment faster. A lot, like marketing has a lot of, I think the stereotype of the marketing intern is a real one, because there's so much like this heavy lifting that needs to happen to do great marketing. Yeah. And so I think really that can be really accelerated now with all of those platforms. And so there's, endless cheat sheets at the moment around like, how do you do your keyword research? Yeah. How do you optimize your messaging? We talked a lot about customer insights, but, there's tools being developed, which they call our synthetic data, right? Which is basically, you can ask as if it was your customer or your potential customer, what would matter to them. Yeah. And so really developing that. So I think that is really the most exciting part, is that a lot of that heavy lifting that would delay projects or not allow us to go as fast as we would like can really be transformed now. But even just to the fact that realistically right now, yet to be seen, but the predictions right now is that you'll be able to run multi-million, if not billion-sized businesses with only a few people, right? Because AI will be able to really amplify so much your decision making and your production capability that they will not take that much to develop businesses and run businesses. And I'm actually quite excited about that in the sense that I think that it does empower way more people with less cash to run businesses. I don't see this as like, oh, everyone's going to lose their jobs. No, there'll be different type of jobs. I very much believe in that. Every single technology revolution just transformed the way we work and how we impact the world. So I very much believe in that. So I'm excited at seeing that coming together as well, of how we do more, because even today, like, you don't need to know how to code to get a web page together. I mean, you know, ChatGPT code will get you the HTML sorted and off you go. So I think that is quite powerful, especially that means your go-to-market, your ability to start interacting with your audience can be very much accelerated with being your messaging and the web page coming together, etc. And so you need less technical skills to be able to do that. Before you had to have a front-end developer, a designer, and this. Now you can really use all of those tools to get that done. And what becomes even more important is really the foundations, the principles, the understanding of the playbook and what matters to then instruct them, I guess, or prompt them in the right way to get the quality out.
Well, it's a very optimistic way to finish the episode. So, Maya, thank you very much for coming on BGF Good Growth Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's so great.
Thanks for listening to the Good Growth Podcast. If you enjoyed that, make sure to hit subscribe so you're the first to hear about new episodes. And always stay up to date on the latest growth insights.